This is Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell, all talk and all crime. Back for another interview on our show, last time for a gripping minute-by-minute account of the assassination attempt on President Reagan. And today, embedding in a homicide squad in what turned out to be a good month for murder, the inside story of a homicide squad today on Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. Quentin Wilber is the New York Times bestselling author of Rawhide Down, which was the account of the near assassination of President Ronald Reagan. Previously, he worked for the Baltimore Sun and the Washington Post. Now covers the Justice Department for the Los Angeles Times. The book, A Good Month for Murder, the inside story of a homicide squad. Welcome back, Del.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jim.
Hey, a mesmerizing book, but at the same time kind of profoundly sad. There were 12 murders, 3 police-involved shootings, hunting for a brutal killer. Tell us about where this happened, why you decided to embed yourself, how you gained access, etc.
Oh, well, I've always been fascinated by police work ever since I was a little kid, and detective work. I just find it utterly fascinating. And so I wanted to embed and see how homicide detectives do their jobs. It's the hardest job in policing. Speaking for the dead, there's no greater cause, I believe, in all of law enforcement than speaking for the dead. And I wanted to see how they did it. And I wanted to do it in a way with no preconceptions and no slant, right? I wanted to leave everything up to the reader to decide. And so I went looking for a police department. And I also wanted to set it in a place different than a lot of the stuff we see on TV. A lot of the stuff we see on TV is in cities, right? And I was looking for kind of a suburb, small town, suburb kind of place to set a book. And there's Prince George's County. It's right next to D.C. And if you imagine a Pac-Man going to the west to devour one of the ghosts, that is what PG County looks like with D.C. It's going to eat D.C. And it's big. It's an enormous county, has like 1 million people. It is one of the wealthiest black suburbs, black jurisdictions in the country. But it has a lot of problems. And it has a relatively high murder rate, a very high murder rate. So I asked, and the police chief was like, send me your other book. And I sent my Reagan book. He's like, yeah, we'd love to have you. And it was great. And it turns out that he is the son of a Secret Service agent in my first book. Ah. And so he trusted me right away. And pretty soon I was just embedded with these guys. And I had unrestricted access to the point where, like on New Year's Eve, I was the only one in the office. Like I was answering phones.
You talked about it being a relatively higher income black based or black dominated area, but the sense I got from the area where the crime was a little bit lower income, and almost sort of sad that drugs involved almost as an ancillary device, but so much senseless crime.
I think all crime is kind of senseless. I think if we were to set this book anywhere else, what I like about it is, the difference between D.C. and the District of Columbia and Prince George's County, it can be very difficult to discern. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you're driving down the street, you don't even know where you're in. And the areas near D.C. are pretty rough. Mm-hmm. And you don't know which one you're in unless you look at the street sign and notice whether it has the quadrant marking for D.C., so northeast or southeast. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't have that, you're in Prince George's County. That's the only way you can really tell. It's really interesting. And it's, I think all violence is kind of, in this interesting way, it's like a stand-in for everywhere else in America. And so in Ohio or Iowa or wherever where they're having a rash of drug-related deaths, mm-hmm. heroin, or, a surge of murders in, for example, Chicago. If you want to know what the Chicago Homicide Squad is going through right now with their spike in murders, mm-hmm. read my book, because you'll get a sense of what it's like to be pushed to the limit, and that's kind of why I chose this book in a way, not quite your question, but I picked 1 month because I was looking for, I didn't know I'd find it until the end, but I chose to frame the story around 1 month because I like watching people in intense situations under intense stress, because I think it reveals true character. And so that's why in my first book, I wrote about one day in U.S. history. It was one of the most dramatic days in U.S. history when the president shot and almost dies. And this 1 month, and these guys, if you read it, it was the most exhausting month of my life. I fell asleep pumping gas. I fell asleep at a red light. It would almost kill me.
It is amazing and mesmerizing. And, of course, you're with them minute by minute trying to see if they can solve these things. Tell people, how do these differ from TV homicide shows in your mind, having lived through this?
This is so real that it's hard to compare. Like, there's no, although I'll tell you, there are some weird similarities too. So, like, there's, the victims are not always pleasant. They're drug dealers who get murdered, right? And on TV shows, I think they tend to have sympathetic victims.
Yeah.
Or everything gets wrapped up in an hour or even over a series. And stuff doesn't always get wrapped up. I was fortunate. The month that I profiled, I think they solved 10 of the 12 murders, but other times there's like TV episode-like moments where this poor 77-year-old lady gets murdered, stabbed to death in her house. And a detective has to find, they believe, a crackhead addict, drug addict, has killed her and stolen her television. And so they have to find the TV. If they find the TV, they're going to find the killer. And eventually, through police work and, using informants and doing everything, they get to a house and they find the TV in the house, with mud on the back of it. From where
that blew me away, that they hadn't bothered even to clean off the mud from dropping it out the window.
And so and that was like, if you read it, you're like, that's a TV moment, right? I mean, the detective goes outside, and I'm looking at him, and Andre Brooks goes, better than sex, man. This is better than sex.
What also
solves murder.
Also blew me away about that is the guy that bought the TV when it was fenced paid like $40 for it, and this woman is murdered essentially over a $40 flat screen TV. $
40 flat screen TV that you buy at like a Rite Aid, which is it's like a CVS or a Duane Reade, whatever your local pharmacy is or drugstore. One of those cheap TVs that they sell behind the counter. And she's murdered for it, right? I mean, and the guy knew. The guy knew it was her TV. In his heart of hearts, he knew the guy who bought it. Bought it from the killer.
And I think the woman was crippled or something, or bedridden.
Yeah,
I mean, just to add.
Paralyzed. You couldn't. I couldn't have added more pathos if I tried.
Oh, geez. That's the part that's profoundly sad. While you're completely mesmerized, page to page, trying to see if they catch these guys or what's going to happen next to them.
Yep.
I want to talk about some of the other stories, but first, I want you to take us into the interrogation room because I was just also mesmerized by the box, as they call it, the whole goodbye, bad guy, letting them stew. How do they gain trust? They seem to be able to smell when they're lying. Take us through being in there, and I assume you were in the room, too.
I was in the room sometimes when they talk to witnesses, not suspects. If I'd been in the room when they talked to a suspect, I would have been a witness to the interrogation.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't want to be a witness, and so they have a video monitor.
That's right, yeah.
So I watched it on the video monitor, which was, I'd have to go back. It was really poor quality, so I'd have to immediately go back and ask them questions about what they did and how they did it, and because you'd miss things on the video, So, or I could look, or they'd let me listen at the door. But there are ways you just interview them and say, well, what did you do that? And I couldn't really tell in the video. It looks like you leaned forward a little bit. And they say, yeah, totally. Whatever. They explain it. But they play games, like TV. Like, if I remember, you were just asking me about what's the difference between TV and real life or whatever. They play good cop, bad cop. They literally do that. I mean, they actually do that, and it works. Like, dude, you've watched this on TV 1,000 times. They're playing good cop, bad cop on you. They do that, and it works. And then they're really good at telling when you're lying. Like, there were guys who came in, especially in the beginning. I didn't really pick up on it, but they would come in and they just lie. Yeah. And I'd be like, oh, well, that sounds like a good explanation. And Detective Mike Kroll or Sean Deere would look at me and be like, no, they're lying. Don't be stupid. I'm like, really? Yeah, watch. And 8 hours later, they've confessed or they've picked out the murder in the photo lineup. And one of the detectives, Greg McDonald, a really smart guy, told me, he said, Del, the first 8 hours belong to them. And that means they lie for the first 8 hours, and they let them do it. They let them just keep lying and lying because they don't beat you. They don't hit you with phone books anymore. They don't do anything like that, right? It's all mental. And so they let you sit there. He doesn't let you lie, and then they leave you there for a while. Let you lie some more and let you leave there for a while, And they order pizza and let the smell of the pizza drift into the room. Then they give you food, and then they, ply you with, Coke and stuff like that. And eventually, they get the truth from you often. If you're really savvy, they do.
I found that intriguing because some of these guys are clearly hardcore criminals, and they'd be, after 2 or 3 hours, they'd get like almost a confession out of them. if not a confession.
They either get a confession or an admittance, or they lie so badly that they could use. And these things are all captured on video, right?
Yeah.
Interrogations, and so they could get them lying about all this stuff, and they can play that for the jury.
Now let me ask you. Let me ask you this: They also fair amount of time use the technique of sort of planning a lie. To we know that your cells were pinged and you were right here, and they may not have that evidence yet. Does that lead to a coerced confession? Is that fair?
No. Yeah, totally fair. The Supreme Court said deceit and trickery were perfectly legal, and so ever since then, cops lie. Cops lie. Everyone lies in that box. Right? Everyone is lying, and so the cops are lying and they're lying, and they will. I was sitting there, and this one guy this detective really wanted this guy's DNA because he's worried he's a killer, but he doesn't really think so. But you never know. So how does he get the guy's DNA? Now, if he tells the guy, hey, we're investigating a homicide and we'd like your DNA, and the guy's the killer, he's not going to give him the DNA, right? And they don't have the evidence to get a search warrant to get the guy's DNA. So he's like, I know what I'll do. And he gets the guy, goes, we're investigating the alleged rape of a 12-year-old girl. We don't think you did it, but there's some word on the street you might have. The only way we're going to clear this up is if you give us your DNA.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, I didn't rape any 12-year-old girl. Sure, take it. And then they get the swab done. The technician leaves, and literally the guy sits down. He's like, okay, I'm going to leave now. And they start throwing – they look at him and say, so we really want to talk to you about the murder of Amber Stanley. And his, face turns ashen. He's like, shh. I don't want to use that word, but, God.
Well, that's a good segue. The execution of an honors student. This is – and it goes throughout the book. Talk a little bit about it.
Oh, Amber Stanley was a 17-year-old honors student who, was destined. She was a senior in high school. It was right her senior year starting. She wanted to be a geneticist. She was a model. She was going to go to college. And, she was just brilliant. Someone kicked in her. She was living with her parents at her house, or her mom and her sister, and a foster sister. And someone kicked in the front door to her house, shot her in the arm, chased her up to her bedroom, and shot her several more times, and left her for dead and left. And the only evidence the cops had at that scene were the shell casings. No one could figure out. They dug so far into her past, they couldn't find anyone who didn't not a disgruntled lover at school or anything. They couldn't find anybody.
And then the story weaves in and out of potential suspects. I was also impressed that they had one guy that it looked like very much that he would have done it, but then they determined he didn't. So they sort of were able to keep an open mind?
Yeah, what I was really impressed by, people have read the same passage and said, oh, my gosh, they picked on this poor slob, poor sap, they just picked on him. You don't know. Right? Poor saps kill people, right? And he was this guy was like a peeping Tom.
Yeah.
And it was kind of icky, and, he was really weird, and he had weird answers to things, and you have to verify that, right? If you don't do it the right way, you don't push as hard as you can. And this one detective pushed this guy. He's a sobbing mess. And he would have confessed to it. I don't think there's much doubt that this guy would have confessed to it. But the detective left the room and said, he didn't do it. I go, how do you know he didn't do it? He kept trying to make facts fit. The detective would slip in wrong. He started getting a sense that the guy was not the killer. And so but he wanted to confess to it in a way. So he slipped in wrong facts. The detective slipped in wrong facts. The guy would jump on them and verify the facts. But they were incorrect. They were alternative facts, to borrow Kellyanne Conway's saying. And and then the detective would be like, well, I'm not going to, this is not the guy, And he joked. He left the room and joked and said, hey, if you have any murders you need closed, we can close them on this guy. It was just a joke, And there's a lot of dark humor. But in the Amber Stanley murder, this honor roll student, it's the kind of the central case in the book, and they have a guy they think did it, and they chase him to the very end, the day before the end of month of February. A good month for murder takes place in the month of February of 2013. And the second to last day in the month of February, they get a DNA hit on the guy they think really did it, someone they never thought of before. And then they interrogate him through the last day of February. And I'll leave it to the reader to figure out if they, break him or not. But
and they refer to this as a red ball case. What does that mean exactly?
Yes. Oh, yeah. So red balls are high-profile murders that everyone in the community cares about. Everyone knew that Amber Stanley had been murdered. It was front page news in the Washington Post and the TV stations. It led the broadcast for days and days and days. And it gets its name from express trains back in the 1800s. They would get certain signals, I believe. I forget where it's not on the train, but at the station they'd have red signal, meaning they didn't have to stop or something. They just would go through. And there are these big red balls of light. We call them the Red Ball Express.
And you can't make some of this stuff up. There's an execution of a father in front of his 2-year-old son with his mother the father's mother right there, and the hit ordered by his nephew from prison.
It's so complicated, these family relationships. I mean, that was a murder that Mike Ebaugh. So there are 2 murders in the book that don't take place in February 2013, but they're worked during that month very intensely. So it's like a month of murder. There are all these murders. But the bones of the book, in some ways, are murders that happened just before the month of February. But the main work in those cases occurs during this crazy month of homicides. You know, Mike Ebaugh, this crazy detective. Oh my God! The best part of the book was that
the characters of the.
I had a diet pill popping cheeseburger eater,
a
chain smoking vegan, female quarterback of a semi-pro football team, and a dude, Mike Ebaugh, who bragged about the herbal erection enhancers he took and would go up to the department psychologist, put an arm around him, and say, Joe, why do I cry when I masturbate? Why do I cry when he's joking, right? But why do I cry when I masturbate? They're crazy dudes, man. Those were the detectives. Not the killers. They're crazy. And so to do this job, you have to be kind of nuts. And Mike Ebaugh solved this one murder of what you were just talking about, the murder witness. He is determined to do it. I've not seen anyone in my life who was so determined to bring justice to a guy who was a drug dealer himself, had been in shootings before, was not a very sympathetic victim, but he did it, and it took a lot of work. To be a good homicide detective, I found you have to be smart, you have to be intrepid, and you have to work really hard. You have to have those 3 things. If you do those 3 things on a case, sometimes you get lucky. And I saw that happen. So, if he had been a lazy detective, that murder does not get solved. If he's not smart, it doesn't get solved. If he's not creative, it doesn't get solved. Because there's a security video of the murder, and he's watched it 100 times, and he's trying to recognize the people in the who murdered Nico Mayhew, the witness. And he can't. It's too difficult. It's a bad angle or whatever, and it's fuzzy, and you can't really enhance it. And so we asked another detective who has an encyclopedic knowledge, gang members, to come look at the video, and he doesn't recognize anyone in it. And Ebaugh's just sitting there, and he's lamenting his fate. I mean, God, the homicide gods hate me. I can't believe I'm not going to solve this murder. I can't believe it's going to go this way. And he's really upset. And finally, he turns to this other detective, the guy with the encyclopedic knowledge. And Ebaugh, meanwhile, had been working really hard with the mother of the victim, and he knew the secret sometimes solving homicides of relatives who hear stuff on the street before the cops do. And at the end of a long conversation he had with the mother once, a week earlier, the mother had mentioned street talk that 2 guys named John and Stan had been responsible. And that was all. And he's like, John and Stan, big deal, 2 names. What am I going to do? 2 brothers, John and Stan, what can I do? And he's lamenting. He's watching this video. The other detective doesn't notice anything in it. Sorry, Ebaugh. He's about to leave. And Ebaugh goes, hey, man, F a duck. I mean, I just can't believe it. All I've got are these 2 names, John and Stan. I can't believe it. I mean, that's all I got, man, John and Stan. The other guy looks at him and goes, Ebaugh, are you an idiot? He goes, what? John and Stanley Winston? They just got locked up for some armored car robbery. And he's like, really? And that was part of the thing, too. And so after that, he starts backgrounding these 2 guys and finds out, and through, using cell phone tracking and all these other things, puts Stanley Winston at the murder scene, then backtracks the calls to the jail, finds out that the guy was using the inmate, the nephew, who ordered the hit, ordered from the jail using another guy's account. He finds that account, listens to the calls, and they're talking about the murder, So he got him. Man, that doesn't, right?
Great.
I don't know. It's explained better in the book.
It's great. It's great stuff. Yeah, you're on the edge of your seat. You're listening to Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell here on 1490 WGCH. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And you're listening to Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. We're talking with Quentin Wilber. He was embedded in the Homicide Squad for a month. and it happened to be a month where they had a whole bunch of murders. Let me ask you this: the characters, the cops, the detectives. How did you see them? I mean, they're seeing murder, they're seeing these terrible family tragedies. How are they able to do the job without getting burnt out?
Oh, well, one, I think it takes a special person to do it, and I watch detectives burn out and leave. It's hard. It's a hard life, and it's the hours that crush you. Like, you got to work 48 straight hours, and then you get 3 hours sleep, and you come back and work 48 straight more hours. And they use a lot of dark humor. Like, they are the funniest people. They're just funny, but they're really dark. And so every joke, I left some jokes out of the book, and the jokes I put in the book that they talk about, I set up in a very careful way. I think discerning readers understand what's happening, and they recognize it's kind of a coping mechanism and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that's why they do it, And I know for a fact that my sense of humor changed. I changed. After about 6 months of this, I had some like PTSD issues.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you how it impacted you as well.
And it was really hard for me. Like, I had a harder time. I saw like 27 corpses and ruined a pair of boots in a puddle of blood and flipped on brain matter. I mean, I was right there with them. And that stuff bothered me. But what really bothered me actually was watching the video of Nico Mayhew's death. And you don't actually see him die, but I saw his head blown against the wall at the scene. You just see these guys running after him in the video.
Jeez.
Over and over and over. You watch this to the point where I was like, run, Nico, run. Like, I'm watching it like it's real. Like, it hasn't happened yet, like you're in a horror movie. And that's why I knew my reality had been warped by all this. Like, it hurt me. Like, I wasn't sleeping well. And they go through the similar things, but they're harder edged. And I think one reason police, and I appreciate this more now, I think have a reputation for being a little rough with people or being confrontational. And I'm not saying they should be. And this happened before Black Lives Matter, and like Ferguson and stuff that really highlighted the nature of the relationship between the community and the police, which I think is really important. But it gave me an insight into why they get like that. You're dealing the worst 10% of the worst 10% every day.
That's what I was going to ask.
Changes and on top of that, you're looking down at corpses. Like seeing, smelling death. It's unlike anything.
Wow. I want to go into the neighborhood in a sec, but just a simple question, because these guys work their butts off, as you said, and they're very passionate about solving cases. What are they paid? What kind of a range?
With overtime, they get close to $100,000 a year, I think. I think they get paid anywhere from like 70 to 100. I never even put that in the book.
Yeah,
I didn't.
Let's go.
They get a lot of overtime.
Let's go into the local neighborhood for a sec, because do you get a sense that anti-police, no one snitches? And what kind of and that of course makes sense to me, but it also surprised me. Don't the folks there that are trying to lead good lives resent all the crime by the relatively few number of criminals there?
Yes, and I think a lot of them have a hard time with it, but it's not always clear who the criminals are, and the criminals are also people's daughters and sons and cousins, and there's a big drug economy, and so and the crime is often committed by a lot of people associated with the drug world. So the people ordering hits, like the witness who's murdered is a drug dealer, the guys who order the hits a drug dealer, the guy who's killed in the park's a drug dealer, the guy who kills the woman over her TV is a drug addict. But there are others. I was at a murder suicide in College Park. That was very tragic, and it was just a mental case. So you have that, too. I mean, there's so many different elements running through it.
On the drug economy, Del, it seems like the detectives almost don't really care about that. They don't arrest them for that. Is that just because they want to focus on the murders rather than try and...
Yeah, these are homicide detectives. They don't care about themselves. And in fact, like today we talk about illegal immigration and why local police don't want to cooperate a lot with the feds in some cases. And high crime areas like this, if you have if they're illegal immigrants committing the crimes, as that happens in PG County, you need them as witnesses. You need the undocumented people as witnesses to solve the murders. And if they're afraid, the cops are going to snatch them up, right, and send them back to El Salvador. They're not going to talk. And your murders are not going to get solved. And the problem is, if you don't solve a murder, there's going to be another murder. If you kill one person, you're likely to kill someone else. So when you actually arrest a murderer, you are actually stopping downstream violence. You're stopping that guy from killing someone else or hurting someone else. You're also stopping that guy from getting murdered, right? Because that guy just killed somebody, so someone's going to want him dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so the vicious cycle of violence. And so, that's what. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, they have. They basically focus on the big picture there.
Just the murders.
Tell us, as we sort of tally up your stay there, the month that you focused on in the end, what is the meaning of clearance rate, and what are the metrics they use to see how successful they are?
Oh, it's a clearance rate. So, it's the number of murders. It's the number of solved murders divided by the total number of murders is your clearance rate. That's what you're judged on. And you get to count murders you solve from previous years in that year. But, when I was there, their clearance rate the year before was amazing. And a year after I left, it was not great. And so it's hard to tell sometimes when, some of it's luck, and some of it is hard work, and some of it's having the overtime costs, the expenses to be able to do it. And I don't know. It's so complicated.
How has now this was 2013, has the crime rate come down? Have they found fixes of a longer-term nature to try and get their arms around this?
What was really interesting is they came up with a very expensive, February 2013, they just had a massive rash of murders, right? And so to stop it, they put cops on like 33 street corners from 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. in their cars, their lights on. And they just wanted to put people there, just so, like, within that 3-block radius, no one got murdered. Because those were the blocks where everyone got murdered. And then they had, no murders. They had, the longest stretch without a homicide in PG County in, history. It was insane. I went back, 20, 30 years. I couldn't find another stretch of it. And so that's what you have to do. But it's not sustainable because it costs $100,000 a week to overtimers or some outrageous amount. So and I have not checked in more recently on what the murder rate is there. I have not. But I assume it's a little up like everywhere else. But actually, murder rates are down. They're just up in some places. But I have not researched that.
Is this gang-driven that you saw, a lack of nuclear families, these kids just looking for groups to belong to because they don't have it at home?
No. Well, maybe. I think a lot of it's poverty. And if you're in lack of education opportunities and culture, and I think those are the three main things, drivers. And the fact that, there were wonderful mothers. That mother, sometimes that you just can't, you can be the best parent in the world and your kid could still go off the rails. And so sometimes it's just bad parenting and sometimes it's good parenting, and you're just in these areas where it's concentrated with a drug problem. That what frustrates me in some ways is that, areas like PG and Baltimore, for example, had drug problems for a long, long time. And it seemed to me that people didn't really care that much outside those communities. But now heroin is everywhere, right? In Ohio and Pennsylvania, and it's an epidemic, and it's being treated both as a law enforcement and a public health crisis. And people care because it's now everywhere, in white communities and black communities, not just in majority black communities, and they kind of care more. And I don't. It's so sociological. I didn't write a sociology book.
Right.
That's not. I wrote a book that I hope when people read, they have a better understanding of what life is like in high crime, in even non-high crime areas, and what it takes to solve murders, and that informs the debate a little bit.
And you get sort of this sad sense of hopelessness. Do you think better schools or vocational training or things like that would help out in these areas?
Definitely.
100%.
If they had much better schools and they funded them better, then I think that would help a lot. And I think if they had better training for parents and they intervened earlier in problematic families and they had better foster care systems and they had better everything. But it's hard. I mean, how do you?
Yeah, it's hard to read.
That's not going to. But even if you did all that, I still think there'd be a lot of problems because it's poverty, right? And you can't. We live in a capitalistic society, so you make money, and if you're poor, you don't have money. Life is harder.
We obviously you present everything just as it is, as you said, very blunt. Description of all the guys that are on the detective force. How have they reacted to your book?
Well, as you know, there's stuff in the book that I thought would cause them some chagrin, and I allowed the department to read the book prior to publication to raise objections to anything that might hurt a witness,
right,
or wreck a case. I didn't want that on my conscience. And so the department knew what was coming. And I worked very closely with detectives after I embedded with them to fact-check things, so they kind of knew it was coming too, and they knew this would be in there. And I thought for sure some of them would be a little, and there's guys talking about masturbation and sex with their wives and all kinds of stuff, right? And I thought for sure that would bother them, and it didn't. I saw a Facebook post from one of the detectives. He's like, hey, this guy wrote a book about us. It just came out. And just so you know, it's all true. And that made me feel good.
And it really, obviously, you recognize what these guys are doing. So that must be what makes them feel good. And you also get a sense of how hard their jobs are. We're in an anti-police moment right now, but this sort of presents, that it's not like a day out on the street just harassing people for the sake of harassing them.
No, definitely not.
Did you find the forensics cool as we finish up? I mean, it's just amazing how the cell tower pings and things like that put these lion guys like right on the spot. They don't seem to realize that they're basically turning themselves in.
What I could not believe was that how important cell phones were to solving a murder.
Yeah.
Like, everything is about the phone. And I didn't quite appreciate that. I mean, I knew it, but I didn't really know it until, the first thing they wanted was not your fingerprints. They wanted your phone. Because you have photos on your phone, you have social media postings on your phone. Then they get they subpoena the phone company. They have to know who you called, when you called, and they know where you called from. Generally, and they solved a bunch of murders thanks to those phones.
So as we conclude that you basically, besides you suffered along with them basically.
Oh, I totally did. It was hard. I didn't anticipate that either. I thought I was a tough guy and that I would be able to, to make it through. And I had a really hard time at the end. And not even at the end of it, like weeks after it was over, it hit me, And it was just a really hard experience. But one of the best I ever had. It was hard to describe. Like, there was nothing cooler than you're at a murder scene and there's a dead person. They're never coming back, right? That person has been erased.
Wow, yeah.
And they're dead. They're just a lump of flesh. I mean, it's crazy. You're right there with the person who was alive 20 minutes earlier or an hour earlier. And then you watch someone solve that murder. Like, someone is in prison because of these people that you were hanging out with. Or if they didn't and they tried really hard. Like, I went to a Jesuit high school, and the Jesuits were always very big on it. All that matters is the means, not the ends, in the sense that it's the journey, it's the trying hard, it's all that's really important. It doesn't matter if you solve the case or not. It matters that you really, really tried hard to do it. And you did everything possible. And to see people work really hard trying to solve a murder of someone that most people don't care about, outside of their immediate family was really a powerful thing.
Fascinating book and really well put together. Are you working on the Justice Department branch now in the Trump administration? Is that what you're doing?
Oh, my God, yes. It's so busy. It's been crazy.
Is Sessions going to be successful, do you think? Or what's your take on the first 30 days of the Trump administration in the last minute or so?
I think it's too early to tell. I think that I'm not a political writer. I cover the Justice Department.
Right. And
his Sessions has only just started. And so I don't really know. I mean, he has a fundamentally different view than his two predecessors, Loretta Lynch and Eric Holder. And his boss, Trump, has a very different view of the world than Barack Obama did, right? And so I think that it's going to be a lot different. But it's so early. I mean, this is a good question to ask me maybe 2 years from now. Like, call me back 2 years from now and we'll talk about it. And
How about
hopefully I still am employed, and hopefully you're still on the air.
Hopefully Trump's still in office, right? If he isn't. Yeah. Do you think that, have you got another book in you coming or anything?
Oh, I'm always thinking about things, but writing a book is like giving birth to a truck, and I have 2 kids already, so.
Wow. All right, well, Del, we really appreciate your time. You're heading off with some family time right now, so you're very nice to give us that time. Del Quentin Wilber, A Good Month for Murder, the inside story of a homicide squad. It'll put you right inside the car, the murders, the box, the interrogation room. Great story. You're listening to Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. This is Jim Campbell, host of Forensic Talk. Tune into this station on Monday evenings at 6 p.m. for deep dives into the biggest crime stories today. Unsolved murders, financial crimes, penetrating questions.
I'm John Iannuzzi, producer of Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. Each week, you'll hear in-depth interviews, whether it's Bobby Kennedy Jr. on his claims his cousin Michael Skakel is innocent of the Moxley murder, or a brutally honest conversation with Kathleen Willey, one of the women alleging sexual assault in the Clinton Oval Office, or the first interview after prison with an insider trader from the Raj Rajaratnam biggest insider trading scandal in Wall Street history.
That's Monday night at 6 p.m. We'll bring you the facts, the forensic, both sides of the story, from insider trading to crimes of passion.
Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell is brought to you by Park City Productions. Like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on Instagram. That's Park City Productions 06604.